Okay. Well, thank you very much to the organizers of the school and workshop for having invited me here. It's fantastically urban. And so for the first lecture I wanted to do, I would like to tell you about high-spin theories. High-spin theories are interesting for holography. Probably some of the speakers will or have mentioned this fact. And here I would like to base my talk now on the bulk side of the story, and not on CFT, and there are so many experts in CFT that it's not necessary anyway. And you will see again some young tableaux appearing, so it's very nice, the talk that we had this morning, because it's really ubiquitous. Okay, so first a bit of motivation, but I will go quickly about that, because I want to have a kind of pedagogical talk and tell you about the Bachmann-Wigner program, which is a classification of linear relativistic wave equations. And Bachmann and Wigner did that in 48, I think, for the, of course, Minkowski space in 4 dimensions. And this has been generalized since then. Okay, then these have been generalized first in arbitrary dimensions, and then in anti-de Sitter, and then in de Sitter more recently. And we have some references on that. I'll give it. It's in a paper with my collaborator Xavier Beccart and Thomas Basile. The more details can be found. I think I have not been very careful in writing the references on my slides. So that's the basic paper with Thomas Basile, who was a PhD student, and Xavier Beccart, and myself. And you will find references also, many references in that paper about this Bachmann-Wigner program in de Sitter and anti-de Sitter. Good. So motivation for the study of higher spin fields is quantum field theory. I mean, since the very beginning of quantum field theory, people have tried to understand what are those beasts that arise in the classification of Wigner. So there's a Wigner seminal paper where he classified the unitary irreps of the Poincare group in 4 dimensions. And then working with Bachmann, in 48, they have a very nice and clear paper where they classify, I mean, they show that this classification amounts to writing the relativistic linear and covariant equations in spacetimes. And among these representations, the one that I'm interested in, that is interesting for holography, are the massless or LACT particles. They are characterized by 0 mass and LACT, which is an integer or half integer. In fact, in the massless case, there are also the continuous or infinite spin representation that Wigner found, and that has been studied more recently. And I can give you some references. Roslan Metsaev has worked on that, and many others. It has become. But I will not talk about these representations today. So then quickly some comments about the interaction of this high-spin particle. Well, obviously they have never been observed. And quite early, people discovered that there is a problem for the minimal coupling of a spin, of a Harita-Schwinger spin to electromagnetism. Sorry. There's another problem here with my talk. Some help? It still displays correctly on the screen there?
Yes, absolutely. So it's,
or maybe just to, maybe that's the contact. That was a connection. Connection there. Then there's the issue of the coupling to gravity, the Lorentz coupling for a spin massless field of spin greater than 5½ Majorana also, I mean, gave an equation which is very interesting because it has infinitely many spin of unbounded spin. Let's go. Otherwise, I will give my talk there and just sit in the corner. Good. So let's continue as long as we have the screen. So once the high-spin representations have been seen to exist, in the case of the unitary representation of space-time isometry algebra, the next task, first quantization, is to look for second quantization and get a covariant Lagrangian. But here in my talk, I will really mostly talk about the first quantization of the problem, which is really the Bachmann-Wigner problem. But just a few words about the second quantization and the beginning, the first steps. It's first you have to write down the Lagrangian, and which associates a quadratic local and covariant Lagrangian to every UIRs of maximally symmetric space-time isometry algebras. And by the way, don't hesitate to interrupt me also all the time. So this program of writing down a covariant Lagrangian for free fields was initiated by Fierz and Pauli in 1939 for massive spin 2 particle in 4D. And then Chang, Schwinger, I give some names. But noticeably in 1978, Franz Dahl and Fang got the massless Lagrangian for fields massless high spin propagating in flat, ADS, and de Sitter, and anti-de Sitter and de Sitter backgrounds. And they did that by taking the massless limit of the Sim-Hagen massive Lagrangian. So one natural question is, can one generalize this program to arbitrary space-time dimensions? And of course, can one build interactions? But as I said, I will not talk about that today. Notice that in 2+1 dimension, it's very interesting. It's quite different there because you have anions, you have very interesting list. That will not be, again, in my talk today. And maybe for the next lecture, I wanted to talk about 3D representation, and I will see if time allows to do that. Okay, so the Bachmann-Wigner program in flat space of arbitrary dimension was achieved in the late 80s by Siegel, Zwieback, and in the minimal form by Labastida in 89, and then by Xavier Beckert and myself in 2001. Instead, the Bachmann-Wigner program in ADS of arbitrary dimension was basically done by Ruslan Metsaev. But in de Sitter, very few things were known. And so that's why we decided to work on that with Thomas and Xavier. Because the mathematical literature exists, of course. The problem is to dress a dictionary, a translation between what exists in the mathematical literature about representation of the Lorentzian pseudo-orthogonal groups and wave equations, covariant wave equations in de Sitter. And that was, as far as we could see, that was not found until that point. Okay, so I will try to make a review. First, flat space, and then discuss the classification of wave equations in anti-de Sitter, and finally in de Sitter. And if I would like also to talk to you about a representation in anti-de Sitter, which is particularly interesting, which is the singleton of Dirac, because it's crucial for ADS-CFT, and probably Antal has talked about that. But I want to show you some concrete computation that you can check, and well, that I did that you can find in my slides. So let's try to go to that point. So first in flat space, this I will go more quickly because I'm sure that you have been exposed to that, but I prefer to review and then continue later. If it's also too much known, I mean that you are bored about that, also don't hesitate to tell me, and then I skip to later, to next slide. But okay, so for the review, the representation of the Poincare group, they go in one-to-one with the orbits of the Lorentz group. So you take a momentum belonging to some orbit, and you look at the little group so it's a subgroup of the Lorentz group that stabilizes this momentum. So elements of this stabilizer are defined like that. That's the meaning of stabilizer. So then, given a representation of the little group, then Wigner induced a representation of the full Poincare group on the Hilbert space of functions on the orbit valued in this representation. And so the formula is there, so the way to induce. So here I put a twiddle because you are really in Fourier space. Actually, there are some, maybe one should screws or something. This morning it was okay, it went perfectly fine. It was another cable. You had another cable. Okay. Good, so let's continue. So here, you take the representation of your little group and see that this element, so first you represent the Poincare group, so that's the Lorentz transformation, and that's a translation. So that's an element of the inhomogeneous Lorentz group. The way it acts on a function in the Hilbert space valued in R is given like that. And I will not talk you more about that, except if you have a question, because that's really a review. But just to say that this element there is indeed an element that stabilizes the momentum. So this guy here, explicitly what it does, each of these elements, the composition of transformation there, takes you from the standard momentum P to the momentum P that you picked in your orbit as an element that represents your orbit. Okay, so there is something here which is called the Hadron-Nikodym derivative, but it's just a kind of Jacobian, and not nothing dramatic about that. So what about the various orbits? So you have the time-like orbits, and representative is like this, in Cartesian coordinates for Minkowski space. The little group there for a massless helicity particle is, sorry, massive particle there is the full SOD group. I mean, you can rotate in this subspace. Then you have the light-like particle. These are the ones which interest me more. So massless, and they are not identically zero momentum. You can take representative in this form. And they find that the little group is actually the inhomogeneous group in d-1 dimension. I think one easy way to see that is to go to the right cone coordinates, x plus minus. And there, notice that the action of these generators, so then you rewrite the generators of the Lorentz group in these coordinates. And you can see that the Lorentz generators with an I and a minus. So I are the transverse directions. And the Lorentz generator, which is the m minus plus, must be rejected because they don't leave this momentum unchanged. And what you are left with are all the mij, so the Lorentz, the rotation generator in the transverse direction there, and the generators mi plus, which you can call pi I because they are indeed abelian. And you have the action of mij that they just rotate naturally this pi. So you find the inhomogeneous Lorentz group as the little group of a massless particle in this way quite easily. But by helicity, we mean that these generators act trivially on the wave function. So that effectively, we really take SOD-1 as the little group for helicity particle in flat space. And since we know how to build unitary irreducible representations of compact orthogonal groups, it's quite easy to induce that to the full Poincare group, according to the formula I showed you previously. Okay, now for space-like momenta, which correspond to the tachyons, notice that they are unitary, the little group is in fact the full Lorentz group, SO1 d-1. And finally, for the null momentum, so all the null coordinates, well then the little group is again this one. Okay. And in fact, we are interested in unitary irreducible representations of these groups precisely for the seat of particles in the seat. The same group theory. So you are all Jedi in Young tableau, and that's fine, but just for the notation. So the way to build this representation, as I said, you can just for the unitary, for the massless particle of helicity type, you have to build representation from SOD-1. But here the strategy that we use is instead to start from a Young tableau, from a gauge field, which is a representation of the general linear group in d+1 dimension. So here my convention for space-time is that I go throughout the slides, that it's small d is the number of spatial directions and 1 for the time. So it's Minkowski space of dimension d+1. So we take a field, a potential H field, like you have the metric which has 2 indices. Here you have an arbitrary number of indices, not arbitrary, the height must be limited by the space-time dimension, with decomposed into blocks. So blocks made of rows of equal lengths. And the height of each block is H1, H2, etc., up to HB, where capital B is the number of blocks of the Young tableau. And just for the computation. I hope it's not too small for the back. So what is the rule? It's in fact related to the show-while duality. So it was very nice to have the talk this morning. A point that if you symmetrize all the indices, so this field there, it carries a bunch of indices, and I present it by this symbol. If you symmetrize all the indices carried by that field from one row with any index in a row below, it gives 0 identically. Alternatively, there's another convention for Young tableau. So a Young tableau is a Young diagram whose boxes are filled with numbers. Here's space-time indices, new row. So another convention that is useful for Young tableau is that whenever you anti-symmetrize all the indices of a column with one index of a column on the right of that column, you get 0 identically. So we define PB to be the height of the Young tableau. So now, once you have chosen this potential, there is also this important limitation. So in the original program, there's a way to go beyond that, and I will not mention it, although it's interesting in the context of the E11 program of Peter West. But for the moment, I take this subclass, which is anyway still infinite, class of fields, where the sum of the height of the first two columns, C1 and C2, must be bounded by this. Okay, so now, once you have this field, build the curvature. The way to do that is that you act on that potential with as many partial derivatives as you have number of columns. So that you actually put a derivative here on the, if this is below the Young tableau of the field, you act with as many derivatives as you have columns, and then you anti-symmetrize the index of the covariant derivatives with all the indices in the corresponding columns of the field. So that gives you a GL D+1 irreducible field, which we call the curvature, and whose Young tableau is depicted there. Then the wave equation that we impose is simply to act that the trace over any pair of indices must be 0. So there are some Bianchi identities there. You see that if you take an extra curve in any of the column, then you will anti-symmetrize two covariant derivatives, and so you get 0. In this notation, I try to avoid space-time indices as much as possible. So this notation, d1 to ds, means what I explained. So if you act with an extra external derivative on each of the columns, you get 0 identically for all the columns. From this constraint, from these Bianchi identities, plus the wave equation, you deduce that the co-differential, which is the divergence, annihilates also the curvature. So you take a divergence on any indices of the Young tableau of the curvature, and you get 0. And that comes from the Cartan relation that the D'Alembertien is in fact the anti-commutator of the differential with the co-differential. So it tells you that the D'Alembertien in flat space of this quantity is 0, and so that tells you that this is a massless field. It obeys the Klein-Gordon equation with 0 mass. Okay, now you go to Fourier space, the space of the momenta. So you are supported on the light cone, and we try to, now we would like to count the dimension. Okay, some relation that you may find useful. Okay, so from the Bianchi identity, here it's a small proof for the number of degrees of freedom contained in the field equation that the field equation propagates. So from the Bianchi identity, you go again in the light cone coordinates, where only P minus is non-zero for a massless particle. You find that anti-symmetrizing the indices of any column of the Young tableau with a minus gives 0, which means that the curvature must have a minus in every of its column. So we do it here. So that we've exported the Bianchi identities for every column. So that effectively, the curvature and its Fourier modes becomes an irreducible field, no longer of GLD plus 1, but of GLD, because the first row now has been occupied by a minus index. Then you turn to the co-differential relation, that the curvature has a 0 divergence on every indices. And again, so in this light cone coordinate, raising a minus gives you a plus. And so that's the only non-vanishing component of your momentum, massless momentum. So that this is 0 means that there must be no pluses in the indices of the curvature tensor. So 1 minus in every column, not more than a minus, because since they are anti-symmetrized, that would be 0. So we want to count the non-zero, how many non-zero components of K exist. There must be a minus, there must be no plus. So you are left, and then the tracelessness of the field equation, this tracelessness, means that you have the tracelessness in really in the little group, in the d-1 indices, which are the transverse indices. So therefore you conclude that the curvature reduces on shell to a quantity which is a Young tableau, a unitary irreducible representation of the little group SOD-1 with the Young tableau of the original potential that you gave. You remember before taking the curves, you had the Young tableau. So you effectively get a representation of the little group associated with this Young tableau you picked at the beginning. And that's why we had to impose the relation there. Because there is an identity that tells you that if you have a traceless tensor for which the sum of the first two columns exceeds the dimension of the space in which you work, then that tensor must be identically 0. So in order to have a tensor which is not identically 0, this relation was necessary. It's a special particular case of that is the Weyl tensor for gravity. In 3 dimensions, the Weyl tensor is identically 0 because it has 2 columns in this Young tableau, and the sum of the length of the 2 columns is 4, which exceeds 3. So in 3 dimensions is 0. So for the same reason, we had to impose that.
Sorry, should it be d or d-1?
And that's d-1 because we really want a representation of the little group. We induce a representation of the full Poincaré from the representation of SOD-1, which is the little group for LHCT particle. And that's what this tensor is. So on shell, after you exploit all this identity, you discover that only the transverse indices are activated. So minus, and then all the remaining indices can only be I, J, K, which run from 1 to d-1. And it's traceless. So we really have a representation, a unitary representation of the little group associated with the Young tableau of the big potential. And then, as I said, you induce the representation of the full Poincaré by the formula that I showed. Okay, what about gauge invariance, which is an important concept also for holography? So because of the definition of the curvature, you can see that the wave equation, which is a PDE of order S1, if S1 is the length of the first row, for the potential bar phi from which we started, that this wave equation is invariant under this gauge transformation that I depicted that way. So you have as many gauge parameters as you have blocks of your original Young tableau. So on shell, and fixing a gauge, it's possible, and we showed in the paper with Xavier, that you can reduce this PDE of order S1 to actually PDE of order 2 for the original potential. So it doesn't seem totally obvious that the PDE of order S1 in the potential after partial gauge fixing actually is equivalent to a wave equation of order 2, but it's the case that we prove that. And this way we reproduced the wave equation proposed by Labastida in 1989, which is a good old D'Alembert-like equation for a potential of mixed symmetry fields. By the way, with this field equation, Labastida couldn't prove the number of physical degrees of freedom, the proof that we did in these 2 or 3 slides before. So it was useful to have this representation of the wave equation and not the one, the D'Alembertien-like for phi. Okay, now we will turn to ADS. Any question about Weyl program in flat space of arbitrary dimension for massless LHCT fields? Okay, so let's go now to ADS. And I must give my convention and notation. So I want to treat de Sitter and anti-de Sitter on the same footing as much as possible. So the infinitesimal isometries of those spacetimes are given by these 2 orthogonal, pseudo-orthogonal algebras. So it's SO2, D for anti-de Sitter. For anti-de Sitter, this parameter sigma is +1, so you have SO2, D. Whereas for de Sitter, the convention is sigma is -1, and so you have SO1, small d +1, which is this signature, for the isometry of the theta. So the metric for those two maximally symmetric spaces, I use a mostly plus signature. So that's the usual time direction, the space-time. That's the extra time, if you want, corresponding to second 2. When sigma is +1, there you have an extra minus. Otherwise, in the theta, the extra time direction is space-like. So big capital A and B denote all these indices going from 0, well, there are 2. It can be time or space, according to whether sigma is plus or minus, time and space direction. These are Lorentz indices. They only concern those directions. And it's like that for the Lorentz algebra, which is a subalgebra of the isometry algebra of these spaces. And then, okay, the relation defining this algebra. Okay. So, among these generators, there is one. You can fix one of the indices to be okay, a 0 or space, extra space index, according to whether you are in the theta or the theta, multiply it by mass parameter lambda, and call it the transvections of the theta or the theta. Because then the algebra can be rewritten in this way, where you have the Lorentz algebra, and you have that the Lorentz generators rotate these guys as vectors, and then they don't commute to 0, but they reproduce the Lorentz generators with the square of this mass parameter, which will be proportional to the cosmological constant, sigma being plus, because in the convention, I have not written the Einstein's equation, but in the convention that I'm using, the cosmological constant is negative for anti-the theta and positive for the theta. But there is another useful decomposition, which is more adapted to CFT, and that you must prefer, is that you define the dilation, or in fact energy in the case of ATS, to be the generator with these two indices fixed, I, square root of -1, and this number is 1 for anti-the theta, it's I for anti-the theta, and 1 for the theta. But it shows that the square of this quantity is minus this sigma. Then the translation in the Euclidean space, the space on which the CFT is defined, is this linear combination, whereas the special conformal transformation will be generated by those linear combination. So then the conformal algebra from point of view of CFT, the isometry algebra of those spaces becomes the conformal algebra for the CFT, which is the conformal infinity of yes of the theta. It reads in this way, in the way you're familiar with. Right here, the SOD subalgebra. Then you have the dilation, and the dilation with the translation gives a plus, gives a minus for special conformal transformation, and then this is one of the most important relation, is the commutator between special conformal and translation in the CFT. Good, so now something that we labeled the states in your CFT is a Casimir of the isometry of the conformal algebra. So the quadratic Casimir of your conformal algebra, I define it with a 1/2 here, can be computed on a Fock space with a vacuum which is annihilated, that I denote by like that, which is an eigenvalue of the dilation operator with eigenvalue delta, and which is annihilated by the special conformal generators. And so on such a state, you can compute the Casimir, because if you have a irreducible representation, its value is the same on all the states of the module. So I take in particular the vacuum state. On it, you can compute that it takes this value, so just a bit of algebra, to open up all these indices, capital A and B, and split them into the 0, sigma, 0, and I, J, and it's this. And then I made a P commutator so that this generator acts on the right, so that it annihilates the vacuum. So that essentially what remains when you act on the vacuum, but it will give the same value on all the states of the module, is this, that's the value of the quadratic Casimir of the Poincare algebra. So here you recognize the usual weight, the shadow, the weight of the shadow state. And here you have the term which corresponds to the fact that the state may have an arbitrary spin with respect to the SOD algebra. Okay. that's an important application. But I go back to the Lorentz covariant basis where the transvection generator was given like that. If you represent it by the Lorentz covariant derivative in this way, then the Casimir, another way of decomposing the quadratic Casimir of the conformal algebra, or the isometric algebra of the Sitter, is by exhibiting the Casimir of the Lorentz subalgebra, which is there. Then minus the rest, and the rest takes the form of the square of this generator with this coefficient. So if you set that this difference of Casimir of the isometric algebra with Casimir of the Lorentz is a number, then that gives you a wave equation in this representation, which is the Lambertien-like equation, which in fact is a generalization of the Labastida equation, but now to anti-de Sitter or to de Sitter. And Metsaev really worked at this level. He wanted to compute these critical masses by requiring gauge invariance of such an equation with respect to the natural gauge transformations. I will show. Okay, but then that gives you at least, that's really in the spirit of Bachmann and Wigner. Okay, so there is an abstract classification of UIRs of this, at least the anti-de Sitter algebra that is available, but still, for a physicist, you would prefer to have a covariant relativistic wave equation, and the connection is done in this way. So, as I said, asking gauge invariance of this wave equation, so I copied it, asking also that the potential be traceless and divergenceless on all the indices. You ask that the gauge transformation be of that form.
Let's do this.
Okay. So you might want to have gauge transformation where you may have more derivatives than just the one I showed for the massless LCT fields in flat space. You may have more derivatives there. For example, here, you can take a gauge transformation which has 3 covariant derivatives of a gauge parameter there. Let's call it lambda 1. Then you may ask also if the wave equation could be made invariant under an extended transformation with another gauge parameter, maybe, I don't know, 2 covariant derivatives, etc. And see what is the largest set of gauge invariances that you can have. Because in ADS or de Sitter, the concept of masslessness is no longer well defined. P squared is not a Casimir of the isometric algebra. So the concept of masslessness is, in fact, defined with respect to the fact that the Fermat module has a null subspace or not, and I will discuss that. But also it's related in field theoretical language to the existence of gauge invariance. So gauge invariance is crucial in all that. So here I indicated that you may have more derivatives, like here you have 3 or 2, and that's related to what he calls the depth of partially massless fields. Okay, but then so Ruslan, Metsaev effectively worked, he took T is 1, just to try to mimic what existed before in flat space, and that I reviewed. And he found that the requirement of gauge invariance gives quite few possibilities. In fact, there is only one gauge parameter at a time, which is allowed. So you cannot have the situation where you could have more than 2 gauge parameters. In ADS or de Sitter, there can be only one gauge parameter there that leaves this equation unchanged. And then that gives also the value of this mass squared of this number. And this value is given there. Remember that Si were the lengths of the various blocks, so S1 is the width of the first block, S2 is the width of the second block, SB, etc. And Pi are the cumulated height of the various blocks. So P1 is H1, but P2 is H1 plus H2. Okay. So these are the numbers that appear in the formula that he found. Then you again have to do some further gauge fixing. You recognize this as a form of a partial gauge fixing, the Donder gauge fixing of a covariant wave equation. So here you have gauge for gauge transformations. So Metzev had to impose similar wave equations with trace and divergence constraints also on the gauge parameters. And that I don't list here. So as I said, in ATS or the CITA, there's only at most one gauge parameter which is possible. Okay, so doing that, he found the values of the masses. So they cannot be anything. But now I go to the group theoretical description of these fields. The way which is quite efficient is to use the technique of generalized Verma module. So you have a vacuum of your module, which is eigenvector of the energy for the Sitter operator and of the spin SOD generator. So that's the maximally compact subalgebra of the anti-de Sitter algebra. And then you build your module, or general Verma module, by acting with the PI generators on it. So by construction, this infinite set of states, they carry a representation of the full SO2D. And then if you recall the value of the quadratic Casimir on the module, on the irreducible module, you recall just this formula. Sometimes E naught is denoted by delta. So delta or E naught are interchanged. So these modules are unitary if the critical energy here is greater than this value. That gives you massive unitary fields in anti-de Sitter. For the value when T is 1 and the block that you activate for your gauge transformation is the first block, so if you act with only one derivative in the first block, then you have a massless gauge field in ADS. If T is greater than 1, then you have partially massless gauge fields, but they are no longer unitary in anti-de Sitter. And then finally, you have the massive and non-unitary fields, where you are below this bound, and you are not given by one of these critical values. Okay. And then also observe that there is another way to write the mass square operator. So there is one way that's here. I mean, I just rewrite it in that way. But this way that Metzev found can be obtained equivalently from this wave equation that I gave. Because you know what is the value of the quadratic Casimir. It's this value on your module. If you are given a Lorentz field, which is traceless field, like that, then you have a Lorentz representation, so you can compute the quadratic Casimir of the Lorentz on it, and the difference gives you the mass. And that's a computation that we can do that it works. It reproduces this formula. Okay, so to repeat, gauge invariance for field equation that we call Fields Pauli type wave equation. Fields Pauli in the sense that we have a D'Alembertien-like equation with a mass-like term, traceless and divergence-less constraints. Because in 39, really Fields and Pauli derive field equation of that type for totally symmetric fields in 4D. Then the gauge invariance is reflected at the group theoretical level by the fact that your gauge field module, in the massless case, is a quotient of modules. So you start with a generalized Verma module, but then you discover that there are some null vectors, some null states that they may appear. For some critical values of this minimal energy, you have the appearance of null states. If you quotient the module by this, and if this is a maximal null space, then you end up with an irreducible representation of the isometry algebra. So let me tell you so I've been describing what happens in ADS-D, essentially along the lines of Ruslan Metzev, and then I gave a bit of theoretical interpretation of that. So in de Sitter, as you could find with Thomas Xavier, things go almost in the same way. So you have also a Verma module way of building your representation. So instead of critical energy in de Sitter, you don't have an energy generator, but you have a non-compact generator, which is the dilation, which is a SO11. So that's for de Sitter. And the eigenvalue associated with that we denote by this delta C. In anti-de Sitter, you are in the lucky situation where you have in the maximal compact subalgebra, you have an SO2 associated with the energy. That's the energy operator. And then the eigenvalue of that we denote by either E naught or delta, as you have seen in the previous. Okay, but still, the Casimir takes the same form. You also find that there is a critical mass. In fact, the field theoretical description I've made is independent of sigma being +1 or -1. So you can again compute gauge invariance and find that in the sitter, it still works with this value of the mass. So exactly the same formula, just that I give different symbol because of this reason. But now, okay, you can ask what means massless, what are the values of this? And for that, well, you have to really work at the UIRs of the Lorentzian algebras. The lucky situation with ATS is that, okay, you have this compact generator there, which is the energy, and then you also have that the raising load generators are emission of the lowering generators, which is no longer the case in the sitter. So unitarity especially is really tricky in the sitter. But I will give you what is the output, what is the result of that. So many people have been working on this, I mean mathematicians, in the 70s and 80s. So, okay, in fact, in Harishandra. So the UIRs of these Lorentzian type algebras, which are the isometric algebras of the sitter, have 4 different types of representation. You have the so-called principal series, where the eigenvalue there, associated with this generator, takes this value. It has a real part, which is d½ and then it has an imaginary contribution, which can be arbitrary, which is I times ρ being any real number. And then you also have a spin associated with the SOD subalgebra. Good, so these will be describing actually, as we describe the massive fields. Then you have a complementary series that mathematician found, where this eigenvalue is bounded by these two. So P is the height of your field, of the Young tableau that you start at the beginning. And so it goes from 1 to r-1, because the Young tableau is described in terms of SOD. Okay, then you have an exceptional series, just to give you the name, where again the values of these are fixed, take some critical precise values, which are discrete. So complementary and exceptional series, you have discrete representations. And also the so-called discrete series, for which the delta also takes some discrete values, but different from the complementary and exceptional series. Notice that this series only happens in fact, even dimensional space-time. So D, you remember, is the number of spatial dimensions. So if this is odd, they exist. In even, I mean, if this small d is even, these do not exist. And I will explain why it's the case. Unless you really ask, I will not explain this. By the way, I should look at left. Normally, I should have 15 minutes. Okay. Good. So let me see about this dictionary. So you can compute, you can complexify this algebra, and then until the sitter and the sitter are the same, just SOD plus 2 as a complexified algebra. The way we did to match with the mathematical literature and wave equation was to use the Bernstein-Gelfand resolution that gives you what is the structure of sub-modules that you can have starting from highest weight state in your starting Fermat module. Because then, and then looking at the character, we could match it with the quantities defined there and understand from the character, the way they are written, if it corresponds to existence of masslessness, and if yes, what are the gauge parameters, what are the Young tableau, and if there are reducibilities. So this is really the way we proceeded to compare. Because notice that in the math literature, they are mostly looking at UIR of the group, whereas we physicists are happy with the algebra. So for algebra, I mean, it still requires some work, and you need obviously the works of mathematicians, but at least for me, it's easier to understand representation of algebra than compared to representation of groups, because you have issues of topology which are tricky. But in the end, you get everything if you look at the algebra, there's nothing you miss. So the dictionary, so for the principal and the complementary series in the sitter, they correspond to massive fields. So I take the case of a scalar field to fix the IDs. So the value of the mass square operator in unit of the radius of the sitter is that everything is unitary above 0 for this value. In this range from 0 to d² over 4, it's the complementary series that you find. And starting from this value up to infinity, you have the principal series. So these are really massive fields, and here in the complementary, you have not so massive fields. Instead, in ADS, it's quite different, because here you know from Riemann-Friedman bound that the mass squared can be slightly negative. In fact, it's limited, it's bounded below by minus d squared over 4. But then there is no distinction. I mean, it's one unique representation, which is, it's called the principal in ADS. You don't have the equivalent of the complementary series for a massless field, for a massive scalar field. Massive or massless doesn't mean much in anti-de Sitter. Notice that the singleton, I will come back to this representation because for ADS-CFT is very important. The critical energy is d minus 2½ So then from it, you compute the mass squared operator that appears in the D'Alembertian equation, and you find that it's in this area. There. So the representation that gives the minimal mass squared is the one for which the critical energy is d½ So then, after the principal series and complementary, you have the exceptional series, and these correspond to really the partially massless fields, which can have some height, some t, some depth, so t can be greater than 1. So they have gauge invariance, so there is a structure of sub-Fermat module and sub-Fermat modules that we found. And so they correspond to exactly those fields for anti-de Sitter, but now we are in de Sitter. The difference also with anti-de Sitter is now it's that the last block of the Young tableau should be activated by the gauge transformation. In anti-de Sitter, you had to activate the first block of the Young tableau with only one derivative, and then you had a unitary module. Instead, in de Sitter, we found that it's the last block that can be activated, but there you can take arbitrary number of SB derivatives. So the depth can be greater than 1 in de Sitter. The unitary mixed symmetry field, generic type, has gauge invariance, where the last block here is activated. The gauge parameter in the simplest case where t is 1. The gauge transformation looks like that. Then you can rid of the gauge parameter, which is here. But you can have a higher value of t, so that t can be 1 gauge and SB, which is this, the width. And then finally, you have the discrete series. Again, so they, as I said, they only exist in even space-time dimension. And they correspond to massless fields, so exceptional, but with the maximal height. So P here is given by R, which is the integer part of d½ So the integer value of d½ is the rank of SOD algebra. So for maximal height Young tableau, they fall into the discrete series, and they are massless again, with various values for the depth. Okay, so that's for the dictionary, where again, so you start from a potential. In the discrete, it's maximal height. The value here is maximal, it's R. Then you have the curvature that you build from it. You act with SB minus t plus 1 covariant derivative, and you project on this Young tableau. And then the gauge parameter associated with this curvature, you start from the field and you strip out t boxes there, and this will be filled in by derivatives. Okay. Oh, and then they are called partially massless. So when t is greater than 1, these fields are called partially massless. So they were originally discussed certainly by Stanley Deser and collaborators and other people. They were discussed for totally symmetric fields. So Young tableau with only one row. And in a paper with Per Sundell and Carlo Gatteola, we generalized this in ADS to arbitrary mixed symmetry fields. And now that's in de Sitter. So these fields play an important role in the case of flat space in string theory, but it's also of interest to look at them in anti-de Sitter. So let's have a small summary. Here in de Sitter, the situation is that you can have an imaginary component of this label there. And if you activate the imaginary part, you are in the principal series, which is a massive field of arbitrarily large mass. And then you have the complementary series, which is here, which is bounded by exceptional series. So I take a Young diagram, which has a given height, P. So you have all this zoology of unitary irreducible representations of de Sitter. Instead, in anti-de Sitter, it's rather boring, in the sense that you don't have a direction of imaginary value for the critical energy. It's normal. And then you have only one area of unitarity. You start from very massive fields in anti-de Sitter. You lower the value of the mass in unit of cosmological constant until you reach the first critical value, which corresponds to the massless field, for which the first block is activated with only one derivative. And all the values of delta below this value give rise to non-unitary fields. Any question about that? I will now try to go to the singleton in the few minutes that I am left, and make precise and at least explicit some of the concepts that I mentioned before. So in the scalar case, now let's forget about all the Young diagram technology, no spin, 0, the field then obeys this Klein-Gordon equation. So it turns out that there is a value of the mass, which is quite, the mass squared, which is quite interesting, which is in fact -2 in anti-de Sitter, which corresponds to Casimir, quadratic Casimir, which is this, which have two possible values for E0, and those values are compatible with unitarity. So if you have this value, it turns out that E0, well, as you can see, E0 is 1 or 2, both give the same quadratic mass in the D'Alembertian equation, and they correspond to Dirichlet or Neumann boundary condition in ADS. So they are quite, I mentioned because they are important, you've met them for sure in your study of ADS CFT. So in the zoology of massless UIRs in anti-de Sitter, there is another region that is quite interesting. So there is the one which is the D1, 0, here, which is a scalar field. But there is also the D2, 0, which is scalar field with Neumann boundary condition. And then you have all this infinite series of fields, because now I'm taking 4 space-time dimensions. So you are quite limited in the Young tableau you can have. You can have only totally symmetric gauge fields in ADS4. And these are, as I will argue, these are the Franz-Dahl fields. So I describe these fields at the level of field equation on the curvature tensor, on the Weigmann-Wigner. I showed that you can have a wave equation of the second order with critical mass that I gave. And the group theoretical language, the Fermat module language, they have a critical energy which is S+1 and S. This is a special case of the general formula that I gave before in terms of Young tableau of arbitrary shape. You take height is 1, so only one block of height 1, and you put small d is 3 for ADS4, and you get this critical energy for the massless field in ADS. Okay, so then there are extra fields, extra representations which are remarkable and which are unitary in anti-de Sitter. And so again, they are kind of scalar fields, this kind of scalar field. And I mentioned the value in the previous slide. If you take d-2 for the value, so you are above the unitary region, so it's a unitary representation. But it turns out to be a particularly simple representation where you have very few states. Well, of course, it's infinite dimensional because the isometric algebra is non-compact. So unitary representation, unitary irreducible representation of non-compact Lie algebra are infinite dimensional, but it's infinite but in quite humble way. You have only all those dots on the line there. Discrete set of points. So that's why, in fact, partly why it's called singleton, this representation, because all the states, they lie on this single line. But Flatto, Moshe Flatto and Franz-Dahl, they call it also the rack. So there is an equivalent representation, but instead of critical energy being a half integer, well, being d-2 half, if you take critical energy, which is this quantity plus 1/2, and you take a spin, which is 1/2 to start with, then there is an equivalent, very simple representation, again a single line, that they call the D, to honor Dirac, who discovered them, described them first. Okay, and I would like to finish this first lecture by the derivation of a very important theorem, okay, good, for ADS CFT, which is a Flatto-Franz-Dahl theorem. So I take ADS4. If you take the tensor product of the rack, the singleton, the scalar singleton representation with itself, Plateau and Franzdal discovered that it decomposes into a direct sum of Franzdal representation of arbitrary spin from 0 to infinity. So you recover the D1, 0 scalar field, which was the scalar field in ADS with mass squared -2 and Dirichlet boundary condition. But you also have a spin 1 field, you have a spin 2, which happens to be the graviton. I mean, it's massless, it has gauge invariance. All these modules have gauge invariance in the sense that there is a sub-Fermat module that you have to quotient. So they are really massless fields. They enjoy gauge invariance. And in fact, in the field theoretical description, you can take the flat limit of that, and you recover the usual massless field of flat space. So there is another one which concerns the tensor product of the D with itself, the D with the D. But I will give all the details now for this, how to prove that, and following Plateau-Franzdal. But a consequence of this, and I'm sure that Antal must have discussed that with you, and that you know it very well, is that it's a compositeness of massless particle in ADS. A massless particle in ADS is actually a composite particle made of two states. And that the rack itself, although it obeys a wave equation of this form, so the critical mass there is 0. Sorry, that's not the critical mass, that's in flat space. So that's the description of the Dirac singleton, but not in the bulk. In fact, in the bulk, the critical mass is 5/4 unit of cosmological constant. But the same representation happens to be also a representation in flat space. So this morning, we discussed the fact that if you have a representation of a big group, if you branch it under a subgroup, you will have a representation which is no longer irreducible. It will decompose into a direct sum of representation. But in fact, the singleton is a noticeable exception to this rule. It's a representation of the full conformal group, so SO2, 3. But if you, well, first it lives in three dimensions here. It obeys the D'Alembert equation in Minkowski space of dimension 2 plus 1. So you might say first that it's described by representation of the Poincare group, ISO 1, 2. But in fact, it's more than that. It is unitary, it's irreducible in flat space, but it remains unitary if you go to SO2, 3, which is the conformal group. And vice versa, if you start from SO2, 3, and you branch it under SO1, 3, then you discover that it remains irreducible. So that's quite remarkable. Good. So this field is described by that wave equation on the boundary. It has conformal dimension 1/2. You build an action like this in 3D. And you can compute, and Eastwood looked at the symmetries of this field equation, and you find that it's given by the universal mapping algebra of the conformal algebra over what annihilates, what gives 0 on the module, which is the rack. And so this quotient there is an associative algebra by construction. If you add the commutator, then you get the Lie algebra, which is the highest spin, the simplest highest spin algebra that was encountered in ADS CFT. So this representation is particularly important in the context of ADS CFT. So now I would like to make the small computation for you. Well, anyway, you will have the slides, and of course it's not original, although I have not seen it in all details, I will show. So I would like to describe this module of the rack. Now first in arbitrary dimension. Remember that the energy operator, which is the same as dilation. I rename the special conformal, I call it L minus. The translation in flat space, I call it L plus. I recall the commutational relation there. And build the module, the generalized Verma module, which is you start from the vacuum state and you act on it with all the Pi, which are the L plus. So L plus because they increase the value of the energy by 1 unit. And I recall that this is a vacuum, it's annihilated by the special conformal generator. So one first has to look for null vectors in these generalized Verma modules. Because if there is some, it's interesting, it represents a notion of gauge invariance and short representation, or ultra short representation. So if you do that, you look level by level, so you act with 1, 2, 3, etc. And you look level by level, you scan if there is a null vector. You can find that at the level 1, so if you act on the vacuum with 1 L plus, you have nothing that can be annihilated by the L minus. So you would get an L vector if you have some states there which would be annihilated by L minus. But you can see that level 1, I mean, the computation is done, there is no way to make this vanish. It cannot vanish because E naught is 1/2 in 3D, or it's d minus 2 half, it's not 0. Then you go to level 2, L plus, L plus. You act on L minus on that, use the algebra, use all that, I gave all the computation, and you find that it's possible for a null vector to exist if you contract K and J. Sorry for those who are in the back. I tried to ask if it's possible to zoom. You contract K and J with the delta Kronecker, and this state happens to be annihilated by L minus I precisely for the value of E naught, which is d minus 2 half for the rack. Good. And then you can show that there is no higher null vector which is independent from the null vector you just found. Because based on this null vector, L plus K, all the descendants of these are again null and form a sub-Weber module that you may wish to quotient. So indeed, you do this quotient, you find that there is no other null vectors, and that's the description, the hypothetical description of the rack. Now, another example, which is the Franz-Dahl field. You start from a totally symmetric representation of SO3, this Young diagram, and again, you look at the existence of if there is some null state. So at level 1, if you contract, this index J here is contracted with one of the indices carried by the field. I'm sorry, it's really small. It was so small, the screen. But the outcome, all the computations are there, that you find that there is indeed a null vector precisely for the value of the critical energy E naught, which is S plus D minus 2. You find the S plus D minus 2 here. So if E naught takes that value, you have 0. So you have that a state is annihilated by the lowering generator. So then you have a submodule. You can show that there is no other independent submodule in it. So if you quotient, you have a unitary irreducible module. It is in the unitary area, which is describing the Franz-Dahl field, a massless field in ATS at the group theoretical level and on shell. Only the physical degrees of freedom. Okay, so I think it will not be necessary to make a reminder on algebra and characters because you have been exposed already quite a lot to group theory and algebra. I want now to prove the Franz-Dahl, the Flatto-Franz-Dahl theorem by using the character. And again, that was explained this morning. When you have the tensor product of two representations, you know, in general, it will be given by a direct sum of representation of the same algebra. And you can describe that at the level of the characters of these representations. Here is not group, but algebra, it's the same story. Is that if you take the character of two representations and multiply them, you know you are able to expand them as a sum of character with some multiplicity, which are essentially the same as the little Richardson coefficients, or the Clebsch-Gordon in other terminology. So that's what we want to do, and see that the Clebsch-Gordon or the little Richardson are all one. So here they are all multiplicity 1 coming in this decomposition, and this we want to find, and for that we use the characters. So some review about, and this is certainly not necessary. Anyway, you will have the slides. And I even recall how to build the character for the representation of SL2. But just for me to continue, so the character of for the spin S, let's say, representation of SL2, which is the same as SO3, we really take the real form SO3, is given, is given by this quantity, where beta is related to the weight. So I have just to recall that the character is a function on weight space. It takes a weight and it gives you a number like that. So it acts, the character has to, first it is defined with respect to a highest weight, then it acts on another weight, arbitrary weight, to give something, which is the character. Okay, so here I will just give, and I will not explain all that, anyway you will have the slides. It's first that I compute the character of the rack, because I know how it is described in this Werner module, and I just have to count just all of the states and then compute the character. So the character then takes this form. And really all the computation are done. Then I turn to the computation of the character for a Franz-Dahl field. Again, we know what are all the states in this field with the null vector that has been quotiented out in this module. So we can list all of them, see what are the spin of all the states, and what is the critical energy, what are the energy of these states. And all that you incorporate into the character, which has all this information in it. So here it requires a little bit more work. Okay, but you look at all the states, you sum them with critical energy, etc., and then you find this value for the character of the Frans-Dahl representation. And by the way, you recover in this way that the difference of the two characters of generalized Verma module, which exhibits the fact that there is a gauge invariance that you remove if you want the states corresponding to the pure gauge transformations. Fine. And then finally, you compute the sum of the characters for all the Frans-Dahl fields from spin 0 there with critical energy 1, which is the Dirichlet boundary condition, and then the sum from 1 to infinity of all the characters of the Frans-Dahl fields. You do a little bit of algebra, and you find that it's exactly given by the square of the character of the rack that was computed just before there. So that which proves the flat-2 Frans-Dahl formula in this case, and which is really at the heart of holography for ISBN 473 correspondence. And I will stop here. I mean, well, I think it's good to stop here.
Any questions?
Just if you can illuminate the triple product, what would it give us?
It will give massive fields. So as soon as you go beyond 2, you end up with massive fields. In arbitrary dimensions, actually you also start to see some mixed symmetry fields, massive mixed symmetry fields. So that part of this kind of computation we've done also with Xavier and Thomas Basile. But Thomas Basile, who is now postdoc in Seoul in the group of Ihan Young, with Ihan and their collaborators, they have worked on computing higher tensor product of singleton, the explicit formulas, always based on character, really the same type of computation. It's quite also interesting because you can not only take the tensor product, but you can take the symmetrized or anti-symmetrized tensor product. You can take platism of the rack with itself. And this again, they have done quite so far in some details. I can give you the. But yes, so the spectrum there that you see, it's a kind of minimal, it's only one Hergé trajectory. So that's why some people are interested in higher spin theory, because it could be a theory which is simpler than string theory, because you have infinitely many fields, but not much, only this set of fields. And that's the content of Vasilyev's model. Vasilyev's theory is a theory for an infinite number of massless Frans-Dahl fields. So that's why it's so interesting, this, with respect to the flat-2 Frans-Dahl theory. There could be in fact, there was a proposal by Per Sundell and collaborator that there is an open string description, microscopical description of Vasilyev's theory in terms of an open string with Chan-Paton factors at each end of the string, which is a rack, which is the scalar singleton.
Any questions? Well, thanks, speaker again.